Hi students, welcome to History's Calling, Where Will It Take You? Today joining us we have Dr. Farina King. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We thought to get us started, you could tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay, so Yat-e, hello in Dene Bizad, that's Navajo language, and Sio, that's hello in Cherokee, Jalagi language. My name is Farina King. In Navajo, as I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation, we introduce ourselves by our clans, our family relations. She'e Bilagana Nishle, Do Kiaani Bashish Chin, Bilagana Dashache, Do Sinajini, Dashanale, Akot Egoatsa Nishle. I just explained that I am of white, English, American, white settler descent on my mother's side. And I'm born for the towering house and black streaked woods people clans of the Navajo Nation, Dene, as we call ourselves, and that's my father's side of the family. And then we say that makes us either a man or a woman, our identity of who we are as a being. And I said that makes me Dene, a Navajo woman through these relations. I think that identity is essential to my studies and my approach, my positionality, as we say, to history and the work that I do, because it's through my family's stories and these questions about identity and peoplehood that I was drawn to studying liberal arts, humanities, and specifically history. I am a history assistant professor right now, but I'm going up for tenure. So that means hopefully soon I will be an associate professor, fingers crossed. And we can talk about that process if people have questions about it. I work and teach at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. So many people haven't heard of that place, or they might not realize that they have heard of it. If you've heard about the Cherokee Trail of Tears, most people just hear about that awful tragedy and injustice against humanity of the forced removal of Cherokees to Indian territory and what would become the state of Oklahoma. Well, they were sent away to Tahlequah, which was a town that they started to build and develop after their forced removal there. And the school where I work was actually founded by the Cherokee Nation in the 1850s after that forced removal, and is quite a remarkable story of resilience and revitalization of a people who became, and always had been, dedicated to knowledge and education. And so they had founded both what they called a Cherokee National Male Seminary. And this wasn't seminary like the denominational religious studies per se, but a school of higher learning, and a Cherokee National Female Seminary at a time when there was not always that equal opportunity for women to pursue higher learning in schools. And so Cherokee Nation started our school so many years ago, and through different histories that I teach about and explore, I eventually, I eventually intersect with this history because I wanted to be able to teach and work with Native American histories and specifically community-based research. So I am now at a school, a university with that very deeply connected history to Native American peoples. And we have one of the largest Native American student populations in the country, with over 2,500 Native American students, primarily Cherokees who come. But I am a visitor here, and Oklahoma, as its history was Indian territory, is a gathering place, sadly, due to many forced removals, more than one trail of tears, as different groups had had their own ways of calling and remembering the waves of attacks on their people, dispossession, and removal. And I encourage people, read up on that, learn about that. Where you are at BYU, it's connected deeply to that history as well. That is in Provo, Ute, and Shoshone land. And there's a story behind that in every place, a history to Indigenous land. So that's very important to the work I do, is helping to educate a general public about these different dynamics. And that led me on this path to work at NSU, and that I see myself as a public intellectual in many ways. I try to do collaborations with museums, communities, K through 12 educators, anyone who will listen. I'm trying to explore a lot in public history, digital humanities, because there's so much work that needs to be done to educate and make people aware of these complicated histories of Native American and Indigenous peoples. And I'm a director of a Center for Indigenous Community Engagement at NSU. And I try the best to also sustain relations with my own nation and community, my own family in Navajo Nation, though I live away from Navajo Nation. And so that's some background about me.
Wow, that's amazing. You speak so fluidly about this, and obviously this comes from years of passion and years of growth and years of research, but I'm curious to know, did you always know that this is what you wanted to do?
That's a good question. I think, it's a constant journey of learning. And actually, that's something I recommend to all students, is life is that constant self-exploration and learning. So it's the balance of embracing who you are and trying to be your best self, and knowing who you are in terms of the kind of talents or interests, passions, what resonates with you and why, that propels you and drives you. And that for me, was always at my heart of, I was born in Navajo Nation as a small child, and my father worked with Indian Health Service for many years, worked with many different Indigenous peoples. And we moved back and forth between the Navajo Nation and actually a very cosmopolitan world center of Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, because my father worked with public health with tribal nations throughout the United States, including Alaska and sometimes Hawaii, though Indian Health Service, is heavily focused on and has been on the mainland United States. And when I lived and went to school mostly in the Washington, D.C. area of Maryland, I met a lot of diverse people from all over the world. So that instilled with me a passion for learning about different peoples and cultures, and learning how to recognize them and how important different perspectives and views are, and that it's totally normal to be multilingual, multicultural. I grew up with that in my home, that Navajo was the first language of my father and English my mother's. And though my mother didn't really practice or speak a lot of other language, she was just other languages. She was just so very open and welcoming in our home to people from all over the world. And I was raised in a Latter-day Saint home of that faith as well, since both my parents converted. And in our church, there was a Chinese speaking branch and a Spanish speaking branch, and people with a lot of these world open views, and a French speaking branch that had a lot of French speaking Africans. So you'd think, okay, I'm learning about all these different cultures. Why would that empower me to learn more about Native American histories? Is that Native American histories are very much global studies. That's one thing that I want people to realize, is it was a very concerted effort to homogenize, and in that way it's a dehumanization process when you homogenize a people and divest them of who they are and their intricacies and complexities. And Indigenous and Native American peoples within that is very much a wide diversity and variety of many peoples. We're talking about so many different cultures, languages, histories. But what has kind of pushed us all into parallel and shared experiences is one that is deeply entangled with the United States history of conquest and colonialism, and one that our country, the peoples of what is now considered the United States, are still grappling with and facing, right? These are a lot of issues we're learning about with racial tensions and violence and questions of discrimination and prejudice. And I know this is important and happening on the ground everywhere, including at BYU, with the different committee work on race, belonging, and all these different dynamics. So for me, meeting people from all over the world, I gain respect for their beautiful and rich cultures and sense of identity and peoplehood. And then they would ask me, where are you from? What are you? They would literally ask that question. What are you? Because I had friends from Cameroon, from Mexico, all these other nations. So then I started to question that, and I realized I am different because I am Dene. I'm Navajo through my father. And I also am of this mixed cultural heritage, like everyone is, of families coming together and forging new identities. But I realized that there were not many other Native Americans, and it was the responses of my classmates and friends stopping and looking at me strangely and saying things like, aren't Native Americans all extinct? What? Do you run around a fire and teepees naked? And crazy things that I heard. And I just realized how misinformed and misunderstood Native Americans are to general public. I also realize they can be exoticized or labeled with negative stereotypes and connotations like alcoholism or different dynamics. And then that tied me more to wanting to know my family history, which I also was encouraged to do, being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and told families are together, can be together forever, and work on your family history. So I started to ask my dad questions about his life and started to ask my aunties and uncles. And I just wanted to carry those stories and share them with others. And that's what drove me in many ways to excel in my learning across the board, across different fields and disciplines, because I struggled with school as a small child. I wasn't interested. I wanted to run outside and play. But then when I realized there was actually a project that encouraged us to focus on an Indigenous people, a Native American people. And I thought, I'm going to focus on the Navajo. I'm so excited for this. And I got to ask my dad questions, and I realized what little I knew, and I wanted to keep asking questions and learn more and then share that with others. So that just built off of each other. And then I knew I wanted to teach because I felt like I already was an educator from my childhood, because just my existence and identity as a Dene young woman, it was eye-opening for some people to see me and not think of Pocahontas from Disney, or all the kind of stereotypes they have of Native Americans frozen in time, or the idea that all the real Indians are dead, and the kind of questions I still get of how much Indian are you, that we don't ask that of other people of other nations, and why is that, and addressing people to face those kind of questions. So that was my personal sense of a contribution I could share with the world, and encouraged me in my career path and what I do as well, and different facets of my life.
it's such a vibrant way for you to discover, right? You didn't necessarily have this understanding growing up, but then there were these little moments, whether or not they were through experiences or conversations that you had, that really started to propel this work. And I think that, you know, when I meet with students and we're talking through their love of history and their interest, and they get these questions from people all the time, well, what are you going to do with that degree? Right? You know, some of the things that I help students realize is that there are so many different things that you can do with information. You know, so I heard you talk about this idea of the research that you did. You know, you had a little family history flair, but then you're starting to see how knowing and understanding this history of different peoples and cultures and the experiences that you had with that are actually so relevant to what we're seeing today. How do we continue to have conversations? I know that a lot of us are thinking about, well, how do I make sure that I'm not offending someone when I ask certain questions, or what are the things that I need to be cautious of when it comes to race, diversity, inclusion, etc. So what advice would you have for my students who are thinking, I want to do something impactful with my history degree? What kind of focus groups do you have with them to help them kind of line up? You know, is it research? Is it advocacy? Is it this? Is it that? You know, where are the intersects there? What do you tell students?
Oh, I tell students that it's really up to you what you make of it, and no one does anything alone, but it's that balance of the individual and community and others, support networks, all these kind of dynamics. I think a really great example in a metaphor was one I heard from Greg Cayete, who is a Pueblo scholar of Native American Indigenous studies. And he brought up how significant corn is as a symbol to many Indigenous peoples. And he said, a way of thinking about Indigenous epistemology, but one way that can be applicable to so many different cases and peoples and scenarios, is how on the corn cob, you have the little kernels and they're individual, right? Each kernel it is very distinct and unique, but they are in patterns and together, and they make that whole kernel, the whole cob together, and they are together. And so something I want people to understand is, yes, there's a lot on the individual and there's pressures to feel like I gotta pull my weight, what are my talents? And we also are fighting against ourselves a lot of the negativity, pessimism, and self-doubts, anxieties that I know everyone feels. I feel that too, of a voice in your head telling you you're not good enough, your ideas aren't good enough, whatever it is, a lot of negativity. But what is amazing and what we have to embrace is humility. And what I mean by that is be ready and willing to fail, and don't expect that you have to be perfect immediately. And sometimes you might be laughed at, or sometimes people will say things that are very discouraging, and you won't get that opportunity, you won't get that grant you applied to, or whatever you hoped for. But so many successes, and I'd say a lot, they happen after an ocean of failure. And that may sound frustrating, but it's from those failures that we're learning and we're growing. And that's a part of this learning process. So as an individual, yes, come to know and explore yourself of what is it that makes you tick? What sparks you? What lights you up? And every person has a gift, has a talent. They do, in different ways. And how can you share that talent, especially in the field? Is it something you can cater it to history and connect that with? And for me, I found that I loved history. I loved the way that we communicate, we write, we have different kind of projects that help people to center on lessons from the past, from understanding the past and drawing connections today. But there's a lot of different directions I could take with that. And I'm still having to face that. It doesn't go away. You're always going to have a lot of opportunities and doors. And sometimes the door you thought you wanted, or that it's the only way, it will slam in your face and you just want to give up and, you know, sink in despair and hardship. But actually, that can be a green light for other opportunities that are even better for you. And you learn something even from those failures. It's overcoming those failures that really make us stronger. And I've just really, I've thought about that a lot, because when people listen and talk to people, I mean, I remember being a student and just having so many role models, and it's great to have those role models and to have people to look up to, have different mentors who you can talk to. And I think this is a great program, for example, to hear some people, and it's important for each of these students, go talk to these people individually, because you all, every student has a specific story and different interests. So keep talking and you know, put yourself out there. Yes, it's that vulnerability that's really scary, because I was there where I got shut down, and I'm not going to judge on those people. Maybe it was a bad day or whatever, but there were discouraging moments where somebody kind of looks down on someone looked down on me, I felt like, and was like, you're not worth my time. But so many other people were so gracious and kind and supportive, and that's who you have to gravitate toward. Surround yourself, I mean, you know, be drawn to that positivity and surround yourself with people who will help to uplift you in positive ways and support you. And that's that connection with the community, right? Is that no individual really gets far all by themselves. They did it all by themselves. Even those who pretend they did it all by themselves, it's a lie. They were, you know, supported by so many people. Even, for example, in history, when we work on writing a book, and I'm very fortunate and blessed that I was able to write a book, and I'm working on other books that are coming out, and I just love it because I love reading and sharing knowledge in that way through publications and such. But I think about, even with books, I never thought I could be an author. I never even imagined that. But then it was my experience of meeting other authors and their stories of people coming from the most unlikely places. And some of these career tracks, it can feel like, well, that person got ahead because they had a family where a mom or a dad was an author and they could show them the ropes and all whatever. But there are other people where they just astounded me because they came from, you know, a background where it was very unexpected of them to get through college, better yet, write a book or whatnot. And I was just so inspired by their stories and being able to talk to them and learn from them. And then when I started to work on it myself, and they gave me hope in myself too. And there were times where I felt like, oh, this is impossible. And it took even my husband or my children telling me, you are smart. You can do this. Because sometimes, you know, we will just feel so down and want to give up or just question things. And it helps to have that support and love and care, self-care too, you know, it's a part of all that. And I know with writing a book, for example, I needed to rely on the archivists who spent the time going in and looking for different materials. I had to work with people who I interviewed, communities where I got certain permissions. I had help from so many scholars to give feedback on the work. I had to work with the press and the editors. I mean, that's just a little bit, not to mention all the funding and organizations and learning about different organizations that have these opportunities. There's so many, but I think an issue is people get stuck into, you have to be in the know, right? You have to know that there's these major institutions with fellowships or scholarships, grants, and that they support this kind of work. And so that's where it helps talking to mentors who make you aware of these different kind of opportunities. And now there's so much at your fingertips. I think it's the balance of dealing with, of course, what is eminent and important, where we have pressing deadlines, people have to live, they have all kind of things going on in their lives. But how do you map out, not only the day-to-day responsibilities and dynamics you have, and the deadlines or urgencies you have, but how do you map out your long-term goals and have moments to prepare for that so that you can have alignment and seek to build upon every day towards those major goals that you have? So that's something that I find is so important as well. But then you also need to be flexible. So it feels like so many contradictions, but we all are these walking contradictions and life, I say, because you have to have the vision of a feel of what you want, the direction you have, but you don't know the future. You can't know what's going to happen, like this COVID-19, right? It really threw a lot of aspects of our lives upside down, and so much confusion, and the consistencies or the protocols that we are used to, it's changed. And that's going to happen. So how do we balance this flexibility with trying to have some sense of predictions and visions that we have? So those are some thoughts I wanted to share, thinking about these dynamics, is making goals and yet recognizing that they won't always turn out the way that exactly how you want them. So there's that flexibility with it. And sometimes you'll be faced with opportunities that can be better for you in the end too, and be a part of that constant learning journey.
I don't even know what to touch on as a comeback or whatever, because everything you said is so valuable. I think that one thing that keeps churning in my mind as you've been talking is this idea that the opportunities that you have will match not just the knowledge that you're gaining, but the strengths that you bring. And I keep thinking about conversations I have with students about this idea of, you are not just learning the material in your degree, which is still valuable. You have to have a deep understanding of the material, but you are learning how to become through the skill sets that you're learning. We call it competencies, right? Just that fancy word, right? But you've mentioned connectivity. So that connection,
that's huge.
You've mentioned teamwork, how you are working with several different teams in order to realize a lot of these different things for your job. You've mentioned intercultural fluency, being connected to different individuals, that gives kind of that vibrant understanding that's so necessary to move forward. And then you've also mentioned adaptability, right? Being adaptable to the different things that we cannot plan for. And all of those themes are things that you exercise daily in your job. I just think that that's so beautiful. And you mentioned several other things that I would love to highlight too, normalizing this idea of failure, and the support that you had as you tried different things and then didn't feel like you did well, but what that did was open up other opportunities. I just think that that's a beautiful example of really what happens when you're living your life right, and it doesn't feel right sometimes, but
yeah.
So Farina, oh, sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think regarding your last comment there is, if it's like living your life right, but it doesn't feel right, is that I remember when I was in Young Women's, and it was a simple lesson that maybe somebody else heard in church or something. But one of our Young Women's teachers, she brought out a bucket and she stuck in a bunch of rocks randomly, and they wouldn't all fit. And then she said, if you put in the big rocks first, then these smaller rocks will come in and it will fit. And it was like a magic trick. I thought, whoa, when I was a child, how impressive that was. But that image has really stuck with me if I constantly have to ask myself, what are the rocks, the big rocks of my life? What do I want those priorities to be? And if I have those in my life, those are my foundation, then the other things will come through, and there'll be bonuses or whatever with it. But that's what I need. And it takes that reorientation sometimes, because there's so many distractions, forces, thoughts that shape us internally and externally in various ways. So that's something that I also try to help people realize is it's important for you all to think about what are your foundational rocks in your life. And for me, it's as basic as my family. I want to be committed to my family and support them. And so history became a powerful talent for me, if you will, of I realized when I tell the stories of my family, I'm trying to serve and support them. And for me, it is very sensitive and direct, because I come from a family that have such empowering stories that are beautiful and have really been an inspiration for me. But there's aspects of it, such as finding out that my family lived down the road from one of the worst uranium mill spills in US history, the Church Rock uranium spill of 1979. And I didn't know about that until only a few years ago, even into my graduate studies. And it's as if I always knew, because my grandparents died of cancer, and cancer has been so prevalent among my family. And then with COVID-19 hitting and affecting Navajo Nation at the highest rates per capita in anywhere and then anywhere else in the world, these things are connected. And if people ask, well, why is COVID-19 affecting these groups and Navajo Nation more? If you know this history, you know why, and it was preventable. There was a way to do something, and there's a way that we can do something today, which is amazing, of how Navajo Nation is now leading in the vaccine rollouts. And I listened to a talk recently of our president of Navajo Nation, Jonathan Nez, who said that as many as 90% of Navajo Nation have at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccination. Like it was over 50%, and it's remarkable of how they're doing that. So, these are the stories that are connected to real lives, even issues of life and death, and history matters in this, of helping people to understand this is not something new. It didn't happen out of a vacuum or a void. We've known these issues for generations, and it's time to do something. And this is what's coming up a lot, right? With Black Lives Matter and these different dynamics about race and all kinds of class, gender, intersectional issues that are coming to the forefront, including with COVID-19 and lately in the news about attacks disproportionately on Asians and Pacific Islanders in the United States. And there's a history tied to that. It's not out of a vacuum. This doesn't happen overnight. And that's why understanding and unpacking these histories and really learning from them, instead of saying, well, that's old news, that's past. Actually, people are still perpetuating these histories, that they're alive, they're living in many ways.
Thank you so much for that. I think that tie-in is something that often is missed when you're an undergraduate student and you're sitting in front of your books and talking about it from this kind of learning theoretical perspective into how do we make this so that it practically applies to the conversations that we're having today. So I'm curious to know, and just kind of backing into a different frame of thought, because I think you and I could probably just keep talking about all this stuff. And I realize I haven't even touched any of my questions, which is fine, because I think that we're getting to the meat of what's really happening. But I'm just curious, what kind of advice do you have for undergraduate students as they consider, what are the experiences that you feel that every historian needs to have? What does that look like? And then what does that market look like for the difference that you can make as a historian?
Okay. So I think some crucial experiences for me of, I went to BYU and was a history major, and I loved and tried to take advantage of as much as I could. I double majored in history and French studies, double minored in African studies and Native American studies. And I just wanted to gobble everything up, So I feel like some people in college are just trying to bite the bullet and they say this is so painful, but that means something is off. Are you connecting with the professors who you've done some research about? And in a sense, it is like an apprenticeship. I know that has different connotations, but you're learning from that individual. They in college, yes, they might have certain standards they have to follow, but every professor has a different teaching style. They are a person, a human being, and they have different ways of working with their students. So do research, and find out what kind of professors you want to be on your team, and see it as that they're a part of your team because they're working with you. And even if there's some professors who might still teach like they think they're only going one way, learning is an exchange. And that's something I learned as an undergraduate that I didn't understand really before college. It's exciting as well that you're not alone. You're with fellow students. You're coming together, and that's more of building your team and your network, and that exchange that can happen. That people come with different gifts and backgrounds and experiences that you can share and learn from. And it's so beautiful at college because it's unlike even, K through 12, where you might be from the same town or area. Maybe people moved around, but you're all living pretty close. But in college, you're all coming from a lot of different places, and it can, in that sense, be many different cultures of where you can learn from each other. So try to learn outside the classroom as well. The classroom is just a sliver of your learning at college. I learned so much outside the classroom of just, having that moment of, it's like recharge your batteries, of have that time with the faculty and the moments you're fully geared. And that's important too, is we still have students with all the temptations of, you can play video games while you're in class, you can text, you can look at other things. Be present while you're in college. This is your time to really be filled with all this opportunity. And there's so much going on. It is such a precious gift. It is a privilege. And I just wish everybody understood that and embraced it to its fullest, because this is such a special time of your life. No matter if you come out of it right out of high school, or if you're coming back to college for whatever's happened in your life, you are bringing something to the classroom. You're bringing something to that campus, and understand what that is and be proud of it and share it, but then also be humble and vulnerable and be okay with feeling uncomfortable sometimes when people question perspectives that you've always had or worldviews that you always have. You don't have to always defend everything, and see it as a war. We work so much better when we all work together. And that does take negotiations and exchanges and ideas to have a atmosphere of peace, harmony, and mutual understanding. You don't have to agree. That's not what that is, but learn how to listen and to heed different voices and cultures. So that's something I embraced while I was at BYU. Is there were really great opportunities to be involved. I remember with a luau, and I learned different dances there and met many different people. And I, had never been to the Pacific Isles or places of Polynesia that were affiliated with the luau, but it was so awesome. I was in the New Zealand section and got to meet the instructors who are from New Zealand. So that was so special. I also, as you could tell, embraced learning languages and study abroad, which was amazing because again, that's learning beyond the classroom, how important it is to see the world. Even if you can't afford it or you have a hard time, financially, there's ways to connect with different parts of the world and meet with different peoples. And it does help you to better understand yourself. That was a part of my story, right? That I shared with you of it was through meeting other people that I was better able to understand myself and how I was different. And also how we were similar and had a lot in common and could learn and share in that way. As I said earlier, there could be a lot of intimidating moments with instructors and hesitancy to go and talk to them, but they have office hours and take advantage of that. Make sure the professors know your name, and it's okay to be that student who, just getting to know them and know them as an instructor. And other kind of extracurriculars, like if there's an honor society or a certain club, different kind of clubs, some of you are involved in sports, you form these communities, but they can connect to your studies and learning and finding those ways that they interconnect. And then something I wish in history that I knew about as an undergraduate was how important getting seeing your work that you do in your classrooms living beyond that classroom, that it didn't have to just be a project to get an A and trying to scrape by and procrastinating till the night before to just try and pass and survive, but seeing that I could save those works and that those are building blocks. They can build towards something like a thesis, or if you want to pursue graduate studies, maybe it's the beginnings of a book. I mean, it was as an undergrad that I first read David Wallace Adams' book, Education for Extinction, about Indian boarding schools. And then I started to learn how to ask about Indian boarding school experiences among my Dene family. My father went to a boarding school, and I started to keep asking questions about it and more. And that became eventually my doctoral study, eventually my book, my first book, The Earth Memory Compass, Dene Landscapes and Education in the 20th Century. And so what's amazing from that is David Wallace Adams, that author who I read his book as an undergraduate, he wrote a compliment about my book. He reviewed it and had a positive review about my book. And I later met him, so it's really amazing. This begins as you're an undergraduate, you can have these connections and you never know where it can go in different circles, and things are interconnected. So I say, embrace these different opportunities, and that there are various organizations as well that have annual conferences. You can take your project that you do for a class and think of it as something you want to share. And I know when I was working, like I said, if you're just trying to get past, a class, I remember I did some sloppy jobs that I was embarrassed about, and I don't want anybody other than the instructor to look at it. And I'm just hoping the instructor for some reason will pass it. But something I regret is I should have seen that class as an opportunity to work on a project that matters, and that I want not just my instructor to look at it, but it could be something that serves the broader community. And this is a big aspect of service learning, experiential and engaged learning that you might be hearing about. Embrace those opportunities. They are wonderful. I think especially as BYU is affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there's that spirit of service. Come here, gather, and then go out and serve. Love one another. How do we serve? The work that you do, it can change the world. And I know that there's students at BYU already doing this, which is so remarkable. So I'm really excited to see that. And in history, we can do that too, through the work that we do and how it can be directed towards service, that it's a project that can live beyond the classroom, even in the way of being ready to share it at a conference. And like I said, there's so much information at your fingertips. You can look up different organizations. There's an ethno-history association. There's a Western history association. There's a oral history association. So there's not just one way of history. There's also a public history organization. So learn about all these different organizations because they have so many resources. They have social media, Twitter, Instagram. You can follow those so that you're up to date with these different opportunities. And that's where you can learn about scholarships and grants as well, that they want to support you, students, in progressing and excelling and drawing out these kind of connections. And then there's different organizations like the Newberry Library and the Huntington Library, the American Philosophical Society, all these different groups that are invested in and value history and museums and archives. I mean, it goes on, historical societies. So you have to understand the resources and the different opportunities available to you within your campus. And you have plenty at BYU. I mean, they have the Charles Red Center for Western Studies, an awesome College of Humanities, a lot of great stuff happening there. So be familiar with what's on your campus. You know, there's different kind of grants supporting student research and such, but then also branch out and realize that there are all these different organizations and they want to support students. They're looking for that. So look for them and connect with them. And that will also enrich in your experience because it broadens that network, those connections that are so important. There's not just one way to go, but figuring out what works for you and learning from other people's journeys, and then having, you know, the heroes who you're standing on. Like, we are never alone with our successes and what we do, our accomplishments and the directions we take. It's so important to have our communities and circles that we're connected to.
That's amazing. Amen to everything that you just said. I'm so glad that we've been able to talk about things that we can focus on now as undergrad students that will help us figure this out, because it's not linear, right? There's not one right way to do everything. There's so many options and so many opportunities, which I think can also be paralyzing.
It can be, yeah. Where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah, there's so much to do. And so, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, just start somewhere, just small little pieces at a time. So I'm just so glad that you've exposed us to things that were helpful for you and things that you encourage your students to do.
Yeah. And there's so many ways to connect right now. Like, we're on Zoom and you're having this conversation with me. But I've had students, including those from BYU, they messaged me to meet with me and to have a conversation with me, just, you know, even 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's so easy on a phone call, a Zoom video call, whatever. And that's great, you know, to talk to different people and get ideas from different people, and then, you know, helps you in your mapping out of the path you want to pursue.
Yeah, I love that. Was there anything else that you can think about in this conversation? We've gone a lot of different directions, and I love how fluid it's been. I love how organic it's been. Is there anything else that you feel would be helpful for our students to understand as they are looking toward planning their life, designing their life, and you know, maybe what that could look like after they graduate?
For those who are seriously considering history, and I think there were, with your previous question, some implications about this, some of the competition, and that, you know, it's this race against competitive resources, and that's a hard world that we are living in, and a reality of it. But that's the point. You all are the future, and it matters right now. I mean, think about it this way. In college, the kind of professors they hire or the courses that they offer, people will say, well, we're not going to offer that class because no students are going to sign up for that. And I'm serious about Native American history. In Native American history and Native American studies, that's been brought up, of Well, people don't see that as significant. They're not going to sign up for that. So students won't sign up to take that. So you are in a position of power right now with being a voice about what students want and need in your future. And, this is that balance of instructors they're at a different place in their lives, and they might have already what they're comfortable with knowing, but it's okay to say, this is what we need to be learning right now. And something I advocate for is how important Native American and Indigenous studies are for especially all universities and campuses in the United States, because we all are on Indigenous lands. And to recognize that, especially at Brigham Young University, where I am, wherever we are, this is important of not just, having a check mark of land acknowledgement or of ethnic studies, but this affects everyone's lives. And whether you're conscious of it or not, are we perpetuating negative legacies of the past that were about power dynamics or colonialism, or are we making the world a better place, a place for the multiple generations ahead? Are we nurturing the world and our future generations? So that's something from my personal experience. And I'm seeing students at BYU do this. So much is being led by them. And that is so beautiful that you all are realizing your voice matters, especially now. And so when you're thinking about, well, what can this degree do in the future? You're a part of that innovative, creative process. And yes, higher education has been suffering. I know there's people who they dream of being a professor. And for me, I love this career. I love being a professional learner, that there's the research aspect, there's the teaching aspect, it has flexibility, but it was and is very competitive because our higher, it's connected to deeper issues going on in higher education and how higher education is reverberating and suffering like many institutions through these drastic changes and impacts of a pandemic that is, history and very shattering in many ways. But we as a people are each a part of the resilience and shaping the futures that we want every day and the actions we make. So I think especially in history, we can realize that. If you hope for, those history positions in the future, you're a part of that advocacy right now, of a part of, it's not just, people say that's activism. I don't do activism, but it's a part of being, the best citizen, whatever you want to say about it, a person who has values in education, who has values in college life. You can be a part of saying this university system matters. Maybe there's some things we need to change. What do they need to be? And you can do something today. It doesn't have to be way far away. I think when I was undergraduate student, it is very overwhelming because you can feel like you're just trying to stay afloat and carry on. And there's so much attacking, but already so many movements are led by youth. And it's just remarkable and unbelievable of the potential and what you're already capable of. And every day you're learning, and embrace that, embrace the accomplishments that you have every day. And sometimes that might be just getting out of bed or making dinner for yourself. But every step matters. And I get emotional thinking about this. It's very powerful for me because I know people, students, at BYU, where that was sometimes all they could do. And then it's remarkable that I see them graduate and see, just because you graduate, that's not the end of the road either. Every day is going to be that ongoing challenge, but we grow stronger from those challenges, and the steps and even the simple things, they matter. And I think a lot of students, they understand that, especially there, but it never hurts. It helps to have reminders. And I think that's something I want to share with you is it can be really cutthroat, competitive, but there's, again, those many different doors. There's not just one way, and you're a part of being a trailblazer. You can be a part of being that path setter of not just for yourself, but for those following you, for the future generations ahead. So I just want to say that, leave that with y'all.
Thank you so much. What a powerful witness. I really appreciate it. I've been enlightened and educated and empowered through this whole conversation, Farina. So thank you so much for doing this for our students. And I hope that we can spread this message, because I think it's one that a lot of people need to hear right now. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it. Always love talking to anybody who listens. So if anybody has, questions for me, I have a website, farinaking.com, and it has ways to find out about other upcoming events and the kind of work I do. It gives you a great idea of just the variety of all the things I get involved in the kind of work I do. And so, that can help people as well see some kind of concrete examples there. And that's important, do your research on your time, and even little by little of familiarizing yourselves with what's possible, and then dream, imagine, envision, and that can help even broaden it more.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about this interview. So okay, well, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now.